I have been both right and wrong about Brighter Shores, which is the new game from the original makers of RuneScape. About a year ago, the game launched, and I was initially a defender when it came out. There were a lot of flaws in the game, but basically, my argument at the point was that hey, yes, there are a lot of flaws, but they're acting very quickly to address them. Especially in the early days, they were patching in a lot of quality of life features that players were asking for, and they seemed really attentive to player needs. However, it did have obviously a bit of a rocky launch, and what I said at the time, which I still hold true to, is that I said that basically, especially when you have a live ops game like this, that initial phase is extremely important because you need to basically set a standard very early on as to whether the game is going to continue to develop and grow, or if players are basically just going to abandon it because they feel like they are not being paid attention to or they're not being served properly. And unfortunately, it really ended up being the latter, it seems like, in this case. So, what happened was that basically there was a lot of initial pushback against some of the systems in the game. In particular, essentially the way that the combat system worked was somewhat confusing with the way that it had different levels based on your location in the game. Meaning that essentially, if you were in one location in the game, you would have one combat level, and if you teleported to a different location in the game, you would have a different combat level because there were different combat skills that determined how good you were at fighting, again, based on your location. Which seems really odd to players, and people didn't like it. There were also a lot of professions that were obviously, pretty similar to each other, where it was like, hey, this profession is basically the same as this other one, but in a different location. And then there was also a lot of complaints about how the professions were not really, lining up together. They weren't really doing things, they weren't really interacting the way that they do in other games like RuneScape, which made that a lot of the grinding seem kind of pointless. There was also just not a lot of content. Basically the really, really big driver for continuing to level up your skills in that game when it's basically an endless leveling treadmill is just the fact that there are quests. And those quests require you to have specific profession levels, similar to the way that RuneScape works, and that's the main reason that you have to level up a lot of those skills. Well, the unfortunate problem is that basically a lot of these issues have not been properly addressed since then, and people have kind of given up. So, if you look at the Steam charts for the number of concurrent players, it tells a pretty sad story. You can see from this image that it's basically just down, down, down. There's no real recovery. There's nothing that they've done that's really reversed that flow. And, more and more people stop playing until now it's basically like maybe 150 concurrent players a day, maybe 300 concurrent players in a week. Again, down from a peak of like 20,000 plus, which is not a good sign at all. I myself was somebody who's willing to pay for the members subscription for a while just because I was like, hey, I would like to, support the team. I think this is a good game. I think it has potential. And I myself ended up canceling after a few months. I probably got into roughly around like February or March before I gave up on it. They did end up adding a little bit of new stuff. So over the past year, what has happened is that it looks like they have added player-to-player trading, which is a big feature a lot of people were asking for. They did do an overhaul of the combat professions, so that instead it's just one combat profession, and they don't have that silly stuff where your combat level is different based on your location in the game. And they did an overhaul to one of the skills. However, this is all very basic stuff that doesn't solve the problem, that they really need a ton of content. They need a ton of quests. They need this new chapter that they've been teasing, and none of that is really materializing. They have made a few new quests, but everyone is basically like, yeah, it's, too little too late. And it really makes me, remember, like, something I think I probably said in my last video, is that RuneScape, the original RuneScape, was based on the fact that they would be very rapidly iterating on it. So there would be basically weekly updates where they would be showing you new stuff that was in the game, they would be adding new content, they would be changing things, whatever, on a weekly basis. And so obviously, especially in the early days of RuneScape, certainly they made some bad decisions, they made some mistakes here and there, but they were always, rolling with the punches and continuing to develop. And it's really hard to see the same with Brighter Shores. They do regular updates. They keep talking about how they have, the team is expanding or, what have you, and they're doing this and that. but nothing is actually really making it into the game. Like, most of this, is not actually being reflected in terms of new stuff in the game. And that is the thing, is it's been a year, and content-wise, all we have is a handful of quests that are not enough to, retain players, to draw in new players, or to make people happy continuing to play the game. There's just so little to do that the little that they've added is just, drops in the bucket. And yes, overall, the game needs quite a lot of overhauling of existing systems to be a good game, to be in a good place. But the fact that they're having to do all of this now, post-launch, is really killing the momentum that the game might have had. Realistically, I think that I echo what a lot of people say, which is that, it should have been tighter before launch. They really should have been able to figure out that people would have had issues with these kinds of things in advance and worked on them beforehand and not launched the game in the state that it was in. Because then they have to spend a crap ton of development time reworking existing work, and that's not stuff people like. People don't like to sit around for that. People like having new content on a regular basis so that they can have reasons to keep playing the game. And if they don't, they're going to stop playing the game and move on, which is what a lot of people have done. And I think that the mood is really summed up by, just paying attention to the subreddit. So there is the Brighter Shores subreddit, and it is a really grim place over there. I mean, I cannot emphasize enough how grim it is. The majority of the people who now interact with the subreddit seem to be haters, former players of the game who, don't enjoy it anymore and have a lot of negative stuff to say. And this post really stuck out to me a couple days ago. It says basically that they have a full month and zero progress to show for it. So, Fen Research, the creators of the game, decide to do this regular, here's an update on how the game's going, here's the stuff that we're working on, here's the progress that it's in, and so on. And essentially, their updates from this month to last month, the graphics that they've shared are basically the exact same. No change, no progress has been made. And, he goes, yeah, I even checked it, I double-checked the file names, it's not like they accidentally posted the same screenshot twice. This was legitimately two different screenshots and, taken at different times, and they reflect that nothing has changed on the roadmap. No progress has been made for the entire month, which, again, is very frustrating when you're running what is effectively a live ops game that definitely needs a ton of content and regular updates in order for people to want to keep playing it. It really is something where it feels like a huge step backwards. It feels like the people who originally got it so right with the original RuneScape are not really doing the same this time around. And that is, I think, the biggest issue. Again, I think that this game, Brighter Shores, is at a base level much better than the original RuneScape was. However, I also think that it has a long way to go if it wants to compete with the modern incarnations of RuneScape, or the numerous other games that now exist competitively on the market, and they're not really stepping up to the plate. I would say that they're dropping the ball in terms of really executing on this. And I don't know, obviously, internal company politics, I don't really know, the reality is that you can't necessarily catch lightning in a bottle twice, right? It may or may not have anything to do with Andrew Gower and the Gower brothers. It may or may not have to do with just other things with the team and other pressures on them and just entirely different situations and whatnot. Yeah, but so that's not to knock anybody, an individual, to place blame anywhere. But what I can say is that the end result, the effect of all of this, is that we are not getting a good game out of it in the long run, and that kind of sucks. I really do hope that they are able to still turn this around. I really hope that they are able to get through. Maybe I can still see a world in which they spend, maybe a year or two fixing a lot of the core issues that people have with the core loop of the game. And that sucks because they hemorrhage players left and right while they're doing that. And then maybe they refocus and start making a ton of content, and that really gets people on board. I don't know. It could still happen. They could still turn it around, I would say. But I think that becomes less likely on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And I don't know. I don't know how long it's going to continue to go at this point. we'll see. It's definitely hemorrhaging money at this point. I don't imagine that with, again, just like 150 DAU, 150 concurrent players on a daily basis, I doubt that they're really, they're definitely hemorrhaging money on this. Even if all of those players were paying $5 a month, for example, that's, great. You've got like $1,000. Like, it's not much. It's genuinely, it's not much. So they're definitely not making money on it right now. They're gonna continue hemorrhaging money while this happens like this. And so, I think sooner or later they're gonna give up. I think realistically that's the case. But we'll see. We'll see. Who knows? Anyway, that's all for this video. As always, don't hesitate to like, comment, subscribe, smash the notification bell, comment down below, direct any hate comments down there. Have a good week. I'll talk to you all next time.